guilty of that, so that's one thing I remember when I get up here. Please silence your phones. I also want to mention that we have plenty of books in stock for James to sign for you after the event if you'd like to make a purchase. We're here tonight with James Sturm, cartoonist and educator. His graphic novels include The Golem's Mighty Swing, Market Day, Satchel Paige, Striking Out Jim Crow, and Off Season, plus the Adventures in Cartooning series. He recently worked on Health and Wealth, a graphic guide to the U.S. healthcare system, and edits the entire graphic guide series, I believe, or works on the entire series.
That's true.
Edits, okay, fantastic. Which is extremely popular. I'm amazed at how far these little comics are going to educate kids. It's really great. And not only kids. I learn a lot too. His writings and artwork have appeared in many publications, including the Chronicle of Higher Education, Slate, the Paris Review, The Onion, the best, the New York Times, and on the cover of the New Yorker. And now we have a new graphic novel from him and Joe Sutphin, an adaptation of Watership Down. James is also the co-founder of the Center for Cartoon Studies in White River Junction, Vermont. He lives and works nearby on a former goat farm. That's cool. Please join me in welcoming James Sturm.
Right. When I hear all those things, I feel old. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, and I really appreciate it. You know, I don't know how many more books do I have in me, and so I'm trying to really enjoy and take stock when these moments happen. So thanks for sharing this with me tonight. And thanks for, of course, Norwich Bookstore for hosting this event. So I thought what I'd do is talk a little bit about these two books, 15 minutes or so, and then if there's any questions, we can open it up, and then I'm happy to sign or chat after the official talk. So we'll get after it. So what's interesting to me, so I did Adventures in Cartooning. The first book came out of this series in 2009, and that book, Adventures in Cartooning, the flagship book, was just relaunched with an updated version of another book, and then a brand new book this summer, and then October 17th, Watership Down dropped, and that's the latest. And these books are very, very different. But what they have in common is they're both collaborations. So I think that's going to be a little bit of the focus of the talk tonight. So I'll start with Adventures in Cartooning, and the origins of this book can be traced back to the opening of the Center for Cartoon Studies. There was an assignment that I would give to students, graduate students, in the course, and there was a textbook that I would use, and the textbook was this book, Ed Emberley's Make a World. Okay, you have all. This is so good. Yeah, so I bought Ed Emberley's Animal book at a Scholastic Book Fair when I was like 8 years old or something, and it changed my life. And I'm gonna pass some things around. So I don't have slides, but it's gonna be a little more hands-on. I'm sure they can order that book for you too. So Ed Emberley, basically, what Ed Emberley does is he kind of gives young readers, or in the case of the Center for Cartoon Studies graduate students, a very simple kind of visual vocabulary for creating cartoons. And I would ask students to create a comic using Ed Emberley characters. And what this did was it got them away from thinking about comics as illustrated. You know, people think comics and they think like illustrated text that you put together, and that's what a comic is. And it really isn't. It really is, comics is really much more writing with pictures. So I would ask them to tell a story writing with the pictures of Ed Emberley. And because you don't have to worry about like making pretty drawings or making something too illustrative, you can really focus on the editing and the storytelling, and not worry about all the labor and figuring out what your characters will look like and spend too much time on that front. So the thing about Ed Emberley, he shows you how to draw people, how to draw cars, how to draw environments, and with this basic visual vocabulary, the students could be off to the races. So the very first class at CCS in 2005, I had these two students, Andrew Arnold and Alexis Frederick Frost. They were part of the pioneer class, and they got into the Ed Emberley comic assignment. And then throughout the year, I noticed they liked collaborating together, and we had a good rapport. And I said, hey, what do you think about working on a book where Ed Emberley teaches you how to create these characters and environments? What if we take that a step further and then teach kids how to make comics using the simplified language? We'll do it with very simple shapes. Kids can copy. We'll try to tell an adventure story while giving lessons in cartooning. And both of them said, okay, let's try this. And here's some stuff I'm going to share, which you feel free to take things out of the sleeve, but these are some of the very first kind of layouts of the book. And I can, if you're curious, I'll put one here, and I'll give one up. You can pass that back there, and then you can move that forward and meet in the middle or whatever. And what's really cool about those projects is that because the drawing is so simple, you can work through drafts that really feel like the finished book, right? And as you're working through the drafts, it feels like, in terms of this type of collaboration, like you're doing some kind of like improv, and the characters start coming alive, and we made these very simple designs, like the knight it's just a circle and a triangle, right? It doesn't even have a face. And today I was at the Marion Cross school across the street, and I did a workshop, with second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth graders, a big auditorium full of all these grades. And they were just so excited. You draw some circles, you draw some simple shapes, and they're copying it, and then they're making their own characters, and then they're just like giggling to themselves as things come alive on the page. So that process I tried to kind of capture in these books. And there's 3 of them. This very first one, Adventures in Cartooning, How to Turn Your Doodles into Comics. And I also think of a doodle as a doodle can go anywhere it wants. A comic has to kind of hit its mark, like its little narrative marks. So these books have been just a really satisfying collaboration. And when we first started collaborating on the books, they were my students. I was the esteemed founder of a cartoon school with books under my belt. And I was like the band leader, And now it's so interesting because it's, not 2000 and, started collaborating 2006, 2007. So now it's like 2023. And now they have children of their own. And Alexis has many books under his belt. And Andrew has an imprint at HarperCollins. And I am no longer the band leader. I am just one of we call ourselves the 3-headed cartooning monster. And when we did this book, this Create a World, we each, we talk about blocking in the story, what lessons we want to kind of talk about, and then we want to make a cool adventure. So then we just start drawing, and on copy paper, take photos, pass it back and forth. Somebody will grab somebody else's, do the yes and thing, and keep drawing, and then we start cobbling the scenes together. And it's actually been a really amazing, really amazing collaboration over the years. And I feels like, okay, I think this probably series has come to a, the culmination was this summer as they relaunched this series. So that was really satisfying. And you can see some of the earlier drafts as you pass it along. All right, so that's the Adventures in Cartooning. And when I'm done blah blah blahing, if there's any questions about any of this, we can dive in. So Watership Down was a very different type of collaboration. It started about 5 years ago, a little under 5 years ago, and I heard from my agent that 10 Speed, which is part of Random House, was looking to create an adaptation of Watership Down, which was first published 50 years ago. How many people, just out of curiosity, have read the original Watership Down? Okay, so most of you. And my agent was like, do you know anybody that would want to do this adaptation? I'm a cartoonist. I worked with a lot of cartoonists. A lot of have been visiting artists at the school. A lot of great alumni who have come through the Center for Cartoon Studies. So she often called me looking for folks. And when she said, "Do you know anybody?" I thought to myself, yes, me. I love the book. I tried to read it as a kid, though I didn't get any traction. It was on my parents' shelf in the 70s. And, next to like Leon Burris's Exodus and Robert Graves, some Robert Graves book. And I tried to get into it, but like when you're a kid, I was reading superhero comics, right? And there's a quote from Agamemnon, I'm pronouncing it wrong, but and then there was like a page and a half description of a meadow it begins with, and I was like, all right, I'm out, back to the X-Men, And it wasn't until I moved to Vermont in 2001 when I tried it again. And I'm like, okay, I live in a rural area now, maybe this will be my in. And it kind of was, like it was like this beautiful nature writing, and it really connected me to the forests and woods. And then as I read it, I realized like, oh my God, this is like a superhero page turner. Like there's this band of rabbits, but one's like psychic, one's super strong, one's super fast, one's a great leader. And I just devoured the book, and then I read it out loud to each of my kids, and I even taught it to a class at the Center for Cartoon Studies. So I was really into it, and I was like, yeah, this would make a really great graphic novel. So I was tasked. So I said, I'm interested, and she's like, okay, well, the estate and the press, the 10 Speed, they would want to see, I had a conversation with them. They said, okay, ask them to write a proposal. They said to include 3 artists that you consider working with, that the estate can choose from. So I put together this proposal. And the reason, I draw very slowly and say not well, but when I do my own work, it's my own idiosyncratic work, but I wouldn't say I have some fantastic facility for drawing. So I knew I'd have to work with another artist. My style would take too long, and it wouldn't be so great. So I created a proposal. In the estate, when I say the estate, I'm talking about Richard Adams's daughters, and the daughters that he actually would tell the story to as they were driving around the English countryside, and have lived with this story for their entire lives. So it wasn't just like a bunch of suits. This was for people that really had a lot invested in this and in this project coming to fruition and being done well. And so I knew what my role would be. It would be laying out the book in thumbnails, and then I would like write a script. And when I say laying out in thumbnails, it's just like the Adventures in Cartooning. It's like I draw it out for pacing, blocking it in, and then I work on the thumbnails. And this is the binder of like some of the thumbnails for Watership Down, and you can see like little pages of that, and you're more than welcome to pass that around as well. So I would lay it out and stage it and write the script, and then I would hand it over to the collaborator, the artist that the estate would eventually choose. For this collaborator, I was kind of like, I need a session musician, like somebody to come in, highly skilled, and go to town. And it's interesting because the artist that was chosen, Joe Sutphin, I didn't know, but it's like, doing a call for a session musician, and then suddenly like Eric Clapton walks into the room, and you're just like, oh, wow. So I only knew Joe on Instagram. He had bought a book that I edited about this forgotten cartoonist, Dennis Wortman, who was this really beautiful, brilliant artist, and through the Center for Cartoon Studies, I found this treasure trove of his work, and we did an exhibition in New York and put out a book, and somebody had given it to Joe, and he sent me a message on Instagram and said, oh, I love that art. I love that we came together through a shared love of an old cartoonist. And he's like, I just love that Dennis Wortman book. Thank you for making it. I was like, oh, how nice. And I went to his Instagram account, and I started following him. And then when this opportunity came, I'm like, wow, he draws critters really well. And he was an illustrator. He'd never done a comic before, but his work, I felt, was like a cross between Garth Williams and Bill Peet. And it's like, if I know, and that's like 2 of the all-time greats. And I know that's high praise, but when you look at this book, it is really mind-blowing. He does not take a panel off. Every panel is so beautifully rendered, and he figured out how to draw these rabbits where they feel like realistic rabbits, not too Disneyfied. They move. He went to like a nature preserve, and he drew rabbits to get the feel of them. And I couldn't be more happier with this collaborator. He really did an incredible job, especially it's his first graphic novel, which is also kind of mind-blowing. And also the project, like I said, it took about 4.5 years to make, and a little longer than expected, and there's revisions and more revisions, and Joe was going to color the whole thing, and he started coloring it, and there was no way he was going to get it done, so we had to find another colorist, and we found this guy, another Joe, Joe Hoax, I think it's pronounced, and he had never colored a graphic novel before. He had done children's books, he had done digital, he was really good at digital coloring. But he just was able to jump in, and Joe Sutphin worked with him and got him up to speed, and just his work just seamlessly blended into what we were doing. And when you look at the book, Joe Sutphin himself was saying, like, there's panels I can't tell if I colored them or he colored them. And what's really nice, like, all the original drawings are done with pen and ink on Bristol. There's actually an exhibition of them at the Center for Cartoon Studies in White River Junction, some of the original artwork. But then all the color was done digitally. So that collaboration went really, really well. And of course I should mention, the first collaboration of this process was Richard Adams himself, right? Like, he created these incredible characters, this wonderfully paced adventure story, and Richard, who died in 2016, so he's not around to offer encouragement, but he also has never gotten on my case about any of the decisions I've made along the way. And to start bringing this in for a landing, a couple more things I'll mention. One is that, like, working on the book coincided with the pandemic. And I really felt lucky to have this book in my life, like when the right book finds you at the right time. So my careful reading of the book, my copy is so dog-eared, I read it, reread it, listened to it, referred to it again and again as I was breaking down passages, selecting which text to go into the word balloons, combining things, moving things around. The book was always there with me, and I felt like during the pandemic, it was like a great reminder of, like, the power of resilience, about being afraid and being scared, and then just no matter what, like, mustering the courage with you and your loved ones, moving forward, pressing forward. And I think, the books come out, and I still, like, I have the graphic novel on my drawing table at home or my desk where I work, and I still leaf through it every day, and it's not just like, oh, look what I did. Maybe a little of that, it feels like a little bit of like I need it almost like as an antidote to, like, what is going on in the world and in this country right now. I mean, this is a story of Richard always said, like, this is just a story of rabbits, and it's like, okay, Richard, but it's also like this amazing parable on many levels, and it is a story about rabbits that overcome many challenges, and most notably overcoming an authoritarian ruler to create an egalitarian society, and they do this by forgiving those who may have wronged them, of recognizing everyone's individual gifts, even the weirdo rabbits, and even more radically, their kindness extends to other species. So these humanistic values aren't just virtues that are good to have. They're actually tactical, and they ensure the rabbits' survival in the end. And this is something I'm trying to hold on to, right, as we witness current events. So that's really all I have to say. I mean, I have plenty more to say, but I know it's a fall evening, so I'm happy to hear any questions or talk Watership Down, and then we can go back and sign some books.
So how did they find Joseph Sutphin?
I found him through the Instagram. So they asked me to select 3 potential cartoon artists in this proposal. So I talked to them. I told them what my approach would be, how I would want to be very faithful to the original. Although I did make one really stupid mistake, which I'll mention in a second. But it might have gotten me a trip to England. So when I was thinking about the different artists that I would choose. I'd been following Joe on Instagram and really liked his work, so I included him in the proposal.
You've been following him since he had reached out to you about that other book.
Yes, exactly. So, that's exactly right. So what I did was also, like, I laid out, like, one little page, like, in the beginning of the book, and I just did my stick figures, and then every artist, and Joe was like, hey, Joe is really into it. He's like, I want to get this gig. And he said, can I do some specific examples of the book? And I thought, oh, that's great, but I thought it might be fair to give every artist the same opportunity. So I did a little stick figure of, like, 2 tiers, like maybe 2/3 of a page, and then Joe drew it, and then I gave it to the other people, and they each did a version of it. So that was part of the proposal. So that worked out well. So the really dumb thing what I did was I knew I wanted to be true to the characters, true to the story. But it's like, I live in Heartland, Vermont. There's copses and culverts and fields and coyotes and different animals. And I thought, why can't it's a bunch of rabbits who go a mile and a half to, the whole journey is like a mile and a half, 2 miles, whatever it is. And I thought, can't they set it in Vermont? And Joe lives in rural Ohio, and I could go out and take photos and just use those as reference. And I raised this in an email. And you could, like, hear the needle scratch from across. And you're like, this is a book, and I didn't realize it, but, like, every location that happens in Watership Down is an actual location. Every single one. And they were like, no, this is an English book. This is about the English countryside. It has to be England. You and Joe are coming over. They flew us over, and we took, like, thousands of photographs. And not only that, but, like, they connected us, the daughters, with this guy, Aldo Galli, who was an Italian illustrator, and he worked with Richard on an illustrated edition. And he had this binder and a map, and he would walk us through. We started, like, in the beginning of their journey, and sometimes, like, roads were closed, we had to circle back around, and we went to every single location. He would take out the book and read the passages. From the churchyards they went to Watership Down itself, and it was really quite inspiring, that trip, and it really made sure, like, that we got it right, like we were going to get this right. One funny story, if you'll indulge me, is that sometimes you had to drive around to a place because you couldn't access it through the woods, and you had to make a few phone calls, and we drove up to this estate, and it was gated, and a security guy came and drove in this big truck, and he was meeting us, and this was an important scene. It's like this crucial scene where the rabbits, like, figure out how to use a boat in a river, and it's like the river that they're on and all the little bridges. So we had to get all these photos, and we're met by the security guard, and he opens up the gate, and he says, you can take photos, but not the mansion that it's like this incredible, this incredible estate. Don't take any pictures of that. And it turned out this was Andrew Lloyd Webber's property. And somehow the estate, got it. So we, taking pictures. And I'm just like, I'm literally sometimes on my knees, like, trying to get rabbit's eye view. And there was one point where I started rounding a corner, and, like, I was almost tackled by the security guard, and then I look up and I see, oh, there's this castle practically, and, like, I can't take those pictures, but I got what I needed for the book. But I thought that was pretty funny. There was another, like, famous race car driver, his name escapes me, who owned some of the land that this book took place on. But that was a really good trip as well.
What's a cartoon?
What's a cartoon? What is a cartoon? Well, a cartoon for some people is something you watch on Saturday morning, right? And for other people, Crusader Rabbit, Bugs Bunny, whatever. For some, a cartoon is like a New Yorker gag comic, you know, a cartoon. And I think, doesn't the original definition go back to like a study for something, I believe?
Oh, yeah.
Is that the Italian?
Yeah, the Italian definition, which I kind of like as well. So, yeah. So yeah, I think there's several definitions.
What's a cartoon for you?
What's a cartoon for me? Well, I think maybe all those things. You know, I don't. And it's funny with the term comics and graphic. I mean, a graphic novel. Like I do nonfiction work, or those novels. You know, like this graphic journalism. They call everything a graphic novel now. And at one point, it concerned me a lot, like what everything was called, and I don't care anymore. Honestly, like just don't call me late for dinner. You know. I call myself a cartoonist. I don't necessarily like the term graphic novelist. It sounds too.
Cartoonist better.
Yeah, I'm a cartoonist, and so yeah. But that's a good question. Thank you. All right. Anybody else? Sure. Yeah.
Now, when you invite, or when you chose the 3 artists,
Yeah.
and then the state made the decision,
Yeah.
you don't have to tell us who, were you secretly like rooting for one, or did you just love them all, or?
I only chose people that I mean, I asked some people that said they couldn't do it, and there was a couple people that I couldn't use for different reasons. I only chose people that I thought were, you know, they had an okay budget for the thing, and it's like such a beloved book, so I thought, I mean, I'm just gonna shoot for the moon. So every one of them was amazing, right? I think there was 2 that I felt like I maybe had my thumb on the scale for, and one was a cartoonist I always wanted to work with, and hope to still someday. And the other one was Joe, actually, and I didn't know Joe very well at all. Like, he comes from a very different background than me, and I didn't know him at all. And kudos to the estate; they made the perfect choice. And I made like a brother, a friend for life, like working with him over these last few years. So that all worked out well. One artist that I wanted to work with that didn't even make it into the who I asked or I approached through a mutual friend was this British cartoonist named Posy Simmonds, who's like one of the great British cartoonists, and she does these kind of she like revised classics. Like Madame Bovary became like Emma Bovary, and she's such a great artist. She's been working, you know, revered in England, and incredible work. And but she didn't do email, like it wasn't online. She lived very slowly. Like how would I even? She lives in England. But what was fun was when Joe and I were in England, we had an off day, and we took the train up to England, and there was an exhibition of Posy Simmonds' work at the Illustration Gallery, and we were able to like just soak that in. I don't think Joe was familiar with her work, and I think that inspired him even further. And then another artist that wasn't included in the proposal because she's passed along, but there's the cartoonist Wanda Gog, and there's parts in Watership Down where the rabbits tell folk stories to themselves. So we tweaked the style and the storytelling a little bit, and we shared Wanda Gog books, and Joe kind of tried to incorporate some Wanda Gog into that part of that artwork, which I think he did really well. Yeah.
Got another question.
Sure.
Back in the early 70s, I had a friend who I was living on a commune. I had a friend who was in another commune, and he was a kind of intellectual anarchist kind of guy, and he had the most incredible collection of obscene comics that I have ever seen. It was
Yeah.
that thick.
Yeah.
And he left, and one day he gave them to me.
Yeah.
Okay, and most of them were grotesquely obscene, but they they were very different, and some of them were actually very kind of lyrical. They were like, they're actually, you know, if you just didn't deal with the grotesque obscenity, you know,
Yeah.
like Captain Piss Gums and the Dyke Pirates, right? That was a great one. But they were actually good. Some of them were really good.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I lived with some people who tried to be not misogynist. We tried to be
Sure.
as reasonable as possible, and it rapidly became obvious that this was not an appropriate thing to have.
Right. So the comics that you're talking about,
Like R. Crumb, but that was
Right.
just one of them.
yeah, Robert Crumb was one of them, probably the leading light of what is now called the underground comics. And I had a similar experience. I graduated high school in 1983 and went off to college, and the only comics I knew were like Archie and superhero comics. And I thought, oh, I can't really draw that way, and maybe I don't want to draw Archie, so maybe I'll give up comics. And I'd met somebody who was doing their postdoc who was about 13 years older than me, and he had collected underground comics and shared with me a box of those comics. And yes, I mean, there's insect. I mean, every taboo. It's like make a list of taboos, and it's like check. But for me as a cartoonist, those were very liberating because they were drawn in so many different styles. There was a lot about politics. There were feminist comics too. It Ain't Me Babe by Trina Robbins, and there was like a sense of urgency and all these different styles, and I thought like, okay, I can find myself, you know, it helped me find my voice as a cartoonist. And I think the underground comics, like, you know, they were reacting against the very staid, you know, funny animal comics and the Hall of Justice and superheroes, and they thought comics was a medium for self-expression, and they wanted to kind of like break down how comics were being made, and they didn't use a scalpel, they used a very blunt battering ram to do it. And I agree with everything you say about this, like there's a lot of awful, sexist, horrible things in there, but it also had a very liberating influence, and I'm very grateful to that you know,
I mean,
I learned
some
so
of
much
them-
from them.
Some of them, like, they started from this, you know, just kind of blatant obscenity, and then there were a couple cartoonists that went off into science fiction kind of.
Oh,
like,
everything, yeah.
drifted off into this
Politics,
weird,
science fiction, funny animals.
yeah.
They were drawing on, like, Bobby London's Dirty Duck was drawing on like Crazy Cat from, like, you know, the 20s. There was Jack Kirby pastiches. There was a little bit of everything. It was a very, very exciting time for cartooning.
I know, I do regret that I.
Yeah. You know, a lot of that stuff's been reprinted, so you can you can go find it. Your internet search history might start suggesting some pretty crazy things too.
I
But
live with the memory.
yeah.
that
There you go.
That's good. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
It's a good stuff. I
It was the
remember
Sam Abrams.
seeing that stuff in high school, like,
Yeah.
it blew my mind about, yeah, it was sometimes very revolting, but it was so powerful. It was
Yeah.
so great. And I'm forgetting the pirate, the.
Air Pirates, yeah.
Anyway, but, yeah.
There was a Disney lawsuit because a lot of
Yeah,
these,
yeah,
the Air
yeah.
Pirates are like using
Yeah.
Disney characters in the comics.
This was.
I was just listening to an interview with Dan Clowes, who just came out with a brand new graphic novel, Monaco, which I bought here earlier today, and it's a really brilliant book. But he was talking about he had an older brother. He's a little older than me. He had an older brother that had underground comics, and he's like, that was the first time he saw like how sex worked and like all the parts worked. And he's never seen anything like that before. And again, like, oh, like comics can do this too, you know, because if you know when I sit on a plane, you know, when I was younger, and it said, oh, I'm a you know, and you talking to somebody on a plane, they're like, what do you do? I'm a cartoonist. They're like, what character do you do? Like, it's like they think you either draw Garfield or Superman, and there's a very limited notion of what comics can be. You know, the underground cartoonists, like, were really, really crucial in expanding what it can do. Yeah, I don't think that, a lot of that stuff today, boy, no, only on the dark web. Only on the dark web.
I'm interested to know how you got into cartooning.
How did I get into cartooning? A survival mechanism as a kid, like, and I'm not even joking in some ways. It's like, I read the newspaper cartoons and I really loved Peanuts, and I really related to like Charlie Brown as this kind of awkward character full of, doubt. And I started copying comics, and then I started reading superhero comics and started relating, like kind of getting into those like power fantasies a little bit. And I think some of the reasons that I do comics and still is like to feel that I have agency in a world that like is like a fire hose coming at you, and it allows you to like slow things down, put them into boxes, organize them, and feel like you have some control over the world in slowing things down. And when you're drawing, and I saw this with all these kids at Marion Cross, it's like they get focused like, this is my character and this is what it's doing. And as a cartoonist, like, you don't need to hire actors and directors and get all this equipment, a caterer. You can just take a pencil and a paper, that's all they had, pencil and paper, and suddenly like they can make a world. And this, going back to the Adventures in Cartooning series, this is what I think I was trying to kind of get across, like you can have this. And so cartooning was just like cartooning was just like a way for an awkward kid to move through the world, and kind of, entertain myself and feel like I had some, something going on. And then, of course, I get to high school. I was voted most artistic, although I think most of them thought it was autistic and they were voting for it. But here I am, talking normally, like in front of people. Yeah, so you've come a long way, baby. Yes.
It's great that you shared this.
The binder, yeah.
Because the process from reading the book to roughing out how you're going to split it up into frames and pages. Yeah. How do you? I mean, it's amazing. You're doing. I mean, is that a lengthy, painful process?
It takes a while. It takes a while. So one of the when I started, so I have a friend, Paul Karasik, who's a cartoonist. Sometimes he has gags in the New Yorker, once every month or so. And he did an adaptation with David Mazzucchelli of Paul Auster's City of Glass, and it's one of the great comic book adaptations. And Paul once wrote this really good essay about how he did it, and he's like, all right, City of Glass is this many pages, the adaptation is this many pages, and so that means, like, just do the mathematical ratio of what each chapter in each section and how many pages that would translate to.
Right.
So I started doing that, and gave me a rough sense of, all right, like Watership Down has like 4 parts, and each part is this long, and this is how long the book has to be. And then I realized, like, okay, well, there are some, we know that like there's going to be some areas where there's action, you want to open it up, or you want emotions to land, or you want to create, like, there's pages in here where it's just like, quarter of a page of lightning, and then other pages where, the storytelling gets condensed, but you have like at least like a baseline, right? So all along the way, you have a sense of like how long each scene should take, more or less. And then, I'm always trying to like, if I can make this a little shorter, I know I can, drop those extra pages over here. And then I had a little bit of a spidey sense about like how that might go down just from doing all the comics and layouts I've done in my life. And then, even those little thumbnails, I mean, there's probably like 2 versions of that before that where it was like even rougher, just cutting and pasting and moving things around. And then when I work with, it's like when you're editing comics, it's not like, command undo, like you're drawing everything and you just can't, it's slow going. So I always try to like talk to the people I work with, the editors, and say, they don't always listen, but I always try to say like, okay, here's the destination that we're going to. Right, and here's where we're starting, and I'm going to get on this train, and the train's going to make 2 stops. And at each stop, this is where the feedback gets off and on, right? And then after that second stop, once we get to the final destination, we'll do our copy editing and vacuum the seats and freshen it up a little bit, but we've arrived, And so, we more or less, stage that schedule, so to speak. A few hiccups here and there, but Long Journey doesn't have a few of those. So I guess like I said, it's not my first big project, so I kind of had a bit of a handle, a certain degree of confidence that I could do it. And it's like what's interesting is the book has dropped, and I'm really getting a sense of how many rabid Watership Down fans there are. Like, I mean, it's like a serious, like, you cut Speedwell's lines, and so I didn't think about that too much going into it. I just was gonna stick as what would Richard do? I kind of kept always going back to the text, and it's been really gratifying getting the comments and reading good read feedback and things like that, and people really do seem to appreciate how faithful we were, and that it wasn't just like, oh, they're gonna make it's not like a cynical exploitation of the work. It's like it was a real labor of love. So, and I think a lot of people, I've heard from so many people who are like, my dad's been trying to get me to read this forever, or like, I've tried, my boyfriend, we did a signing at Comic-Con in New York a week ago, and now they have this book, and it's just like so much more accessible, and it's not a substitute, I say in this, there's a little afterword in there where I'm like, you should gotta go back to the original, because it's a totally different experience, like, different pleasures. But it's really satisfying to see that this book could be a way for a whole other generation to kind of like an entry point to Richard's work. Do one more question?
Yeah, another question. I'm having, you did sort of talk about this, but I'm having a hard time that you have your collaborating artist, and then.
Yeah, you can see with that book.
What?
The book, I mean, you can see.
Yeah, but what does the artist get from you that
he gets those layouts. So he literally gets those layouts, and then once they're do you have the words in there? Well, that's a good question. So
There it is.
so they get those. Then there's a script, and then when everything's approved, what I would do is those things are to scale at the page. I made sure they were to scale.
I see, yeah.
So I would scan those at, this is too wonky for people, but 600 DPI, then I would import it into Photoshop, blow it up, and then with doing the layouts, I always make sure there's room for the word balloons. And then I would set the type and the font that we figured out, and then they were at size. I would put the type in, and then my collaborator would print those, put it on a light box, and then he would use those as the foundation for their drawing. Yeah, it's and I don't know how other people work digitally. He drew it all, so it's a real wonky process, but it worked for us.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, and I really I can't argue with the result, and so much of it's funny, like when you're doing the script and you're doing the blocking it in, you're the choreographer, I'm the director, right? But what makes a movie come alive? It's like the acting, right? Like you go and it's like, if it's great acting, that's where the eyeballs of the viewers see it. And what Joe accomplished with the drawing is like that acting and the nuance of the character designs, and so wonderful. So the gestures of all the characters, the heart and emotion that he put into every panel is really, I'm blown away. I couldn't have asked for better collaborators.
Yeah, but even your little gestures are in those too. It's beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for coming out, and I'm happy to chat a little longer and sign some books for the store or whatever. And this was a pleasure. Thanks for rolling this out with me here.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.